Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin. Eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. I got another 6 albums for you guys. The last 3 or 4 weeks I've been listening to all this music. First one I got up is M83's Fantasy. M83 was a really big player for me in the 2010s, in the teens. I discovered Saturdays Equals Youth and just went through a big run on their albums, and every single one of those albums made a huge impression on me, all the way up to Hurry Up, We're Dreaming, the last one with the big Midnight City song on it. The success of Hurry Up, We're Dreaming had kind of a weird effect on Anthony Gonzalez, who's the scribe behind M83. The fame didn't sit with him too well, and there's many reports that have said that, and he went on, of course, after that to make an album called Junk, which felt like an inside joke that only he got. But this album really feels like a return to form. In many interviews, Anthony Gonzalez has said that he really kind of wanted to get back to the more experimental, open-ended roots of what he was doing on his earlier albums. And I think by and large, he has succeeded in that on Fantasy. When they were about to release Hurry Up, We're Dreaming, I remember the promo for that, which just said, here's the new M83 album, and it had this big chord, just fingers playing on a chord. It was this huge, vast, orchestral, spacious sound, and you knew just from that sound that it was going to be an M83 album. That sound defines this entire album. From beginning to end, Fantasy has that sense of huge, vast expansiveness that defines the best of M83's work. And within that vast expansiveness, of course, vocals and things are hidden in that very unique way that makes it feel like a shoegaze album, but with synth pop at the forefront of the sound. Now, the downside to this is that this sound is so overwhelmingly present that it tends to wash out the overall picture by the album's end. If you use the same kind of intensity with something for long periods of time, it loses its effectiveness. Next up, I got 100 Gecs, 10,000 Gecs is the name of the album, and that's a 1 power greater than their debut album, 1,000 Gecs, which a couple years ago was released and contained this sort of magical formula of like innovation and hype that really pushed them out in front, so much so they came to define almost a new genre of music, that being hyperpop. And so all this hype kind of showed up about 100 Gecs and hyperpop, and hyperpop bands started showing up after that. There's a big sort of rash of them, and then it kind of died down. During this whole time, after they released that album, 100 Gecs were pretty silent as the hyperpop wave kind of crested and fell to the sea again. So now, after all that hype has died down, they come back with this new album, and it does in so many ways recapture what was super cool about their debut.
Make it in Hollywood, baby. You'll never make it in Hollywood, baby. You'll never make it in Hollywood, baby. You'll never make it in Hollywood.
One reviewer said that 10,000 Gecs is sort of the audio equivalent of getting a pie in the face for 30 minutes straight. As over the top as that 1,000 Gecs was, 10,000 Gecs is that much more over the top. One of the ways in which it differs, I think, though, from its sort of Death Grips meets the Glitter Trolls debut that they had with the first album, this one feels a little bit more like ska influenced, a little bit more live. More than one song has that feel in it. So although we do have that kind of over-the-top hyperpop sound on several of the tracks on this album, there's some songs in here just almost feels like a Mr. Bungle track. And I mean that in the best possible way. Because there's not that many groups that really are able to keep this level of humor and silliness really in their music and still make it artistically successful and not push it over the top. And I think 100 Gecs were really great at that, and I really love this album for continuing that same narrative without repeating itself. So next up I got Moonlight Benjamin's Wayo. Moonlight Benjamin is an artist I just sort of stumbled across, and very fascinatingly, she is a voodoo priestess, a Haitian voodoo priestess, authentic. And she sings this almost like gut bucket garage band blues style. And her singing style is very direct and very impactful. And clearly there's sort of a connotation here, since she puts her identity as a voodoo priestess out there in front, that it has a sense of being almost arcane. What I think is really fascinating about Wayo is how much of a relationship it kind of has to that strain of Saharan blues that I was listening to last year. So like, M. Da Mokhtar and that sort of thing. But her take on it is much more direct and blunt. And in comparison, that style of Saharan blues is sort of light-footed and playful. And she's a little more ham-fisted. But that sort of loping, polyrhythmic feel that you hear in that music is present here. And I think it's very fascinating that you have these Haitian roots and those Saharan roots kind of come around the diaspora and sort of meet in this music, in the common ground of blues. Okay, next up I got Kate Davis's Fishbowl. Kate Davis's big pop debut album, Trophy, was a big player for me in 2020. It was my album of the year, and that was a year that had a lot of music connected to it and a lot of feelings connected to that music. And for that album to have risen to the top over the course of that year really says something about it. So much of Kate Davis's music I think is interesting because of her background. And if you watch the video posts I made about her album, she's got a very deep study of jazz under her belt, as well as being sort of a prodigious musician in the first place. And I really love the way in which those influences play out in her music in such a subtle way. Her music does not sound like traditional jazz music. It does not sound like it's taken from the American Songbook, but there's so much detail, there's so much nuance in what she does in all of her music that it pulls on that refers to the knowledge that she's gained from that deep study. And that again shows up on Fishbowl. What's not immediately noticeable about Fishbowl that I found to be very interesting as I found out more about it was that it's in a way sort of a concept album. She's written all these songs from the perspective of sort of this character she calls Fibo, that is sort of a dimension-hopping, time-traveling character. And you can kind of see how this might be playing out too in her obvious interest in playing characters in her videos. She did this off a track on Trophy for one of the videos, and you see it here in that Fishbowl video, where she's sort of getting into different characters and singing from the perspective of different people. And what I think is really neat about this too, especially if you look at my Pete Townsend post from a couple weeks ago, she's one of these people that likes to create a world and then write from within that world. And if you're able to do that sort of thing, it creates a really unique kind of cohesiveness. That's a component of this album that's lying right beneath the surface that I'm just now starting to get to, on top of all the great musically informed decisions that she makes on a moment-to-moment basis in all of her music. And I have so much respect for her in the way that she was able to use the studies that she's had and incorporate them into this identity that she's rolling with going forward. Okay, next up I got Erica Esso's 192. There is nobody in the band that I can see so far named Erica Esso. It's the name of the group. And without flattening it too much, Erica Esso kind of belongs to the whole Stereolab vein of academic funk music. But the thing that really distinguishes Erica Esso, I think, from some of the other stuff is their use of very subtle microtonal flourishes in a lot of their music.
Justice only means one thing, one thing. Your life means everything. I paint a picture when I'm at home, while my nation's jaws recoil, spit, blood, and foam.
Now, although they incorporate microtonality into their music, I wouldn't call them microtonal. They still have the basis of what they do revolves around regular tonal music and jazz. But they do have these things that kind of slip in and out, and I think that microtonality is really interesting in the way that it causes like reality to bend a little bit for the listener. And that does give this album a layer of interest that I think sets it apart from like your average, as I said, academic jazz funk album. And speaking of microtonality, my last one up for today is Fast Fast's New Color Bomb. Fast Fast is a microtonal pop group. And I've been listening to some microtonal music on and off for a while. And usually when you run across microtonal music, people who really use these 22-note scales or 16-note scales or 125-note scales in their music, it's very abstract and very ethereal and doesn't really base itself too much on normal, harmonic style music. So what I found really interesting about this idea about having microtonal pop music is how do you make those kinds of decisions? How do you make a pop song that's inherently going to be hard on the listener to accept in their ears? Because that's what microtonality does. The whole time it has this sense that reality is just melting around you because of the way that the chords slip between the cracks of regular notes in a scale. Now, Fast Fast doesn't really entirely break from tonality in the making of this album. What they do is still very closely based on normal harmonic structures, but there is a sense that there's tonalities within tonalities. For example, you have this lick that sounds kind of like a blues lick, but what he's actually doing is taking a line and dividing a step into 4 separate pitches in between. So it sounds like a blues scale, which is actually microtonal in its origin, but really kind of codifying it and making it very mathematic. Again, I think that there's actually some really great tunes in this album, and the microtonality that you hear on this doesn't really pull away from that. If you can get your ear wrapped around what he's doing on this album is really, really interesting, and in its own way, a pretty accessible take on this kind of composition. That's all I got for you guys this week. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe and share it out with your friends. Also, follow me over on Spotify. I'm putting all these tracks up on this big 2023 radio playlist for you guys to check out. Also, please, if you have the opportunity, check out my Patreon and join up. My Patreon group is this close-knit group where we talk a lot about music up close and personal. And we're also taking these albums and putting them on a big bracket and voting on them so that at the end of the year we have a really good playlist of the best albums we've listened to in 2023. We'd love to have your voice involved. So please go and check that out if you have the opportunity. And until see you next time, I'll catch you on the flip side.